The day should be the sunrise. It should be the beginning of great thought.
I wake up in the morning and I consciously create my day the way I want it to happen. Now sometimes, because my mind is examining all the things that I need to get done, it takes me a little bit to settle down and get to the point of where I'm actually intentionally creating my day. But here's the thing, when I create my day, and out of nowhere, little things happen that are so unexplainable, I know that they are the process or the result of my creation. And the more I do that, the more I build a neural net in my brain that I accept that that's possible. It gives me the power and the incentive to do it the next day.
My existence is the best example of creating your own reality. Doesn't that make sense?
Tell us.
Well, growing up deaf, people have a different conception of how or who you should be. You're deaf, we should feel sorry for you. You need extra attention. You need extra schooling. You need extra care. You need to be looked after. Poor thing, she's deaf. And for myself, I looked at it in a normal way. I had and decided I would have a happy childhood.
And we all create our own realities. And we do that because we are the observer. We are each the own observer of our own reality. And each of our individual consciousnesses creates our own individual reality in the most amazing way. My son, Evan, the physicist, says, you know, it's an additive thing. I mean, if I'm holding one reality and someone else is holding another reality. I mean, it's the Super Bowl this afternoon. And the reality that the Eagles are holding is a different reality than what the Patriots are holding. And only one of those realities are going to be the real reality. So there's some additive, and there are interference patterns.
One of the things that comes up about creating realities is what happens when there are two people each creating a different reality. What goes on there? Well, the first thing to realize is that the idea that you create your own reality, if by you you mean that egoic person that you think is running your show creates your reality, it's probably wrong. It's probably not that you that's creating the reality at all. The you that really is creating the reality is what I call the gooey in between the frame stuff. That's the true you.
The place from where we choose to create my own reality, that place of consciousness is a very special, non-ordinary state of being, where the subject-object split tend to disappear. The samadhi or satori that I was telling you about. And it is from this non-ordinary state that I choose. And therefore, the ordinary exaltation of the New Ager also disappeared until it was forced to face the reality that there is really no free lunch. We have to meditate and reach this non-ordinary states of consciousness before we become the creator of our own reality. That took a while, but now I think finally people are recognizing that there is no shortcut, but the cut is not that long either. It's not that hard. It's not that hard. We have been engaging in creativity for a very long time. We have created a great amount of art, music, even science, great amount of it. So there are many people who are experienced with creative process that eventually leads to this discontinuous leap towards this non-ordinary state of consciousness.
The connection between the quantum physicist and the ne'er-do-well on the street is that both of them have the power to create reality. One knows it, the other is ignorant of it. How does science disperse this good news to everyone and yet maintain the ethics of being scientifically absolute and provable time and time again?
If we keep quantum physics and the understanding very simple for the layperson, that our observation has a direct effect on our world, I think if we keep it very simple, then people can get about the business of beginning to practice the skill of observation.
Hey, wow! You got a lot of shots to develop?
No.
Oh, bummer. Well, I'll catch you later.
See, the subatomic world responds to our observation, but the average person loses their attention span every 6 to 10 seconds per minute. So that doesn't leave a lot of room for our attention span. So how can the very large respond to someone who doesn't have the ability to even focus and concentrate? Maybe we're just poor observers. Maybe we haven't mastered the skill of observation, and maybe it is a skill. And maybe we're so addicted to the external world and so addicted to the stimulus and response to the external world that the brain is beginning to work out of response instead of out of creation. If we're given the proper knowledge and the proper understanding and given the proper instruction, we should begin to see measurable feedback in our life. If you make the effort to sit down and design a new life, and you make it the most important thing, and you spend time every day feeding it like a gardener feeds a seed, you will produce fruit.
We are running the holodeck. We are collectively, it's there, it has such flexibility that anything you can imagine it will create. And you learn, I mean, your intention causes this thing to materialize once you're conscious enough.
Yes, so what is consciousness?
What is consciousness?
Well, consciousness is a very difficult thing to define.
The consciousness is the ground of being, therefore it is the one and the original. The chicken and the egg question, however, is very important. For example, how does this one consciousness become a subject-object split experience?
What is consciousness? Where does it come from?
What is consciousness?
People have been trying to explain consciousness and try to figure out what exactly it is, what it means for us as human beings, why we even have it. On a simple way of defining it is it has to do with awareness, and in particular it has to do with awareness of the self. That's at least how we as human beings have self-consciousness, so that when we look in a mirror we recognize that it's ourselves that we're looking at and not some other person or some other animal.
There's quantum coherence among proteins in the brain to give us the unitary nature of self, how we have only one sense of self in our brains, despite the fact that there are processes going on all over the place within the brain.
Well, I mean, I'm going to give you an answer that you're not going to be happy with. And I'm not happy with it either. I just don't know what more to say about it at the moment. There is one can use all kinds of other words: awareness, self-awareness, sentience, feelings, what people call qualia in philosophy. These just seem to me synonyms for it. They're not elucidating what's going on at the bottom of it. Let it suffice to say this. I'm putting myself back on the border again. The phenomenon of consciousness seems to me one of the points at which the collision between the scientific worldview and various anti-scientific worldviews are going to be the most acute. And it's exactly for this reason that I think it's an enormously important phenomenon to think about.
What is consciousness?
Yeah. Well, I define consciousness according to Penrose's view. It's a particular type of self-collapse of the wave function. Now, as you know, things can be in superposition of multiple possible states or locations. That's quantum superposition, and that's the natural state in the quantum world. Now, we don't see that in our classical world. Why not? Well, one explanation is that conscious observation causes collapse. That's the Copenhagen interpretation. Another is that every superposition branches off and forms a new universe, the multiple worlds hypothesis. Another is that interaction of superposition with the environment causes decoherence. And the fourth possibility is that superpositions grow until they meet some kind of natural threshold inherent in nature, which causes them to convert from the quantum superposition state to the classical state. There's several types of these theories which are called objective reduction, an objective threshold for quantum state reduction. One is if the system grows too large. That's the Girardi-Rimini-Weber GRW theory. Another is Roger Penrose's idea that, well, first he starts with a question, what is superposition? And he says it's a separation in fundamental reality at the most basic level. So much like the multiple worlds view, the universe separates and begins to separate, but that these separations, or bubbles, if you will, in reality, at the most basic level, are unstable, and after a while will collapse to one or the other. And that this type of collapse, this type of objective reduction that occurs due to this instability in the separation of the universe is consciousness. And it can only happen in very special circumstances, because you need a system that's isolated from the environment, so it has to be protected, so it doesn't decohere, and it has to be large enough to reach this threshold. The threshold is given by, it's inversely related to the size of the superposition. So something very small, like an electron in superposition, if protected from decoherence, would take 10 million years to reach threshold, and then it would have a very dull, tiny moment of consciousness. Something very large will reach threshold quickly. And in the brain, we think that quantum computations occur which reach threshold roughly at 25 milliseconds. So 40 times a second we have conscious moments, collapses, these self-collapses, in which the superpositions collapse to the classical world. And it's a process occurring at the most basic fundamental level of the universe, at the Planck scale, basically, connected to the brain by quantum computations occurring in our brains.
What is your simple definition of consciousness?
What is a simple definition of consciousness?
Wedding. A wedding. Come on, blink.
This is a good assignment, if you'd see it that way.
What to see? I do. They did.
Oh, God, Amanda. I mean, you live in your past. I mean, everything with you is about what happened. You hate churches, you hate weddings, you hate guys.
Consciousness, we have great trouble defining it. To me, consciousness is a byproduct of spirit entering dense matter. But we have a long, long way to grow before we get to the stage where it is meaningful for us to ask the question, will we know God?
Most people think of God as that great figure in the sky with the white beard who's scrutinizing the human race from above. They see us here on earth as in some form of neutral testing ground, where we're placed by God for a period, and God watches from above, registering the scores on his laptop as to whether we perform according to his designs or whether we're offending him, as it's put. An absolutely outrageous idea. How could we offend God, the type of God that people believe in? How could it matter so much to him? How could it, above all, matter that he would find it so serious a situation that he could condemn us to an eternity of suffering? These are bizarre ideas, but obviously they have a great hold on the fears and the limitations and the insecurities of people, which is why religion can play so effectively, whether deliberately or otherwise, on those insecurities. People fall into line very readily when they're threatened by these cosmic sentences of everlasting punishment.
How in the Ten Commandments could we have possibly created a mind that could transcend space and time? No, we're too busy keeping our emotions in check to ever dream of infinite possibilities. And maybe that is the ultimate conspiracy.
Even though a given person may have long ago thrown off the trappings of religion, they still live in the religious mold, and they don't even know it. but their whole conception of how reality works is all something that has been molded by religion. So until you get that out of your system, you can't ever make go of an evolutionary perspective. I mean, I had an incident once in Australia some years ago, and I was talking about the heaven and hell idea, and this young man of 20 years of age or so said to me, that was really interesting, but thank God, he said, thank God, I am not religious, he said. I said, is that so? And he said, yeah, I'm not religious. My parents had no belief, and I grew up without any beliefs at all. And he had told me the previous day that his father had died when he was 8 years old. So I said, do you mind me asking, where did they tell you your father went when he died? He said, well, they told me he went to heaven. I said, that sounds suspiciously like a religious view to me. And I went down through the 20 things or so, belief in right or wrong, retribution for good and bad deeds, etc. And on every single one of them, he passed with flying colors as a person with a profoundly religious outlook on reality. He was never in a church in his life, synagogue or mosque, but a perfect religious person.
Religion gets you off the hook of living it. It becomes, for example, religion does not have eminent domain over God. Religion is simply the study of God, the mystery of God, and then endeavoring to take from scraps of people all of that interpretation and put it in, well, it must mean this, and so we're going to fast today, and we're going to cover ourselves up, we're going to uncover ourselves up, and if we do this, this is what God is pleased about. But that's just hogwash. And so pleasing God gets us off of the hook of living. I mean, the very fact that we had to have somebody die for our sins is sort of a ripoff, don't you think? I mean, I think we already really should have had the privilege of living out our own sins and by virtue of experience be enriched with wisdom because of them. And I don't see how evolution and how we could ever grow and become astounding beings unless we are fraught with the blight of experience that is bad and harmful and all those things, because only then have we really achieved the wisdom that allows us to understand everybody.
One of the problems with organized religions is that there is this sense of separateness, that it's only good to be a Protestant, or that people who are Catholics are the only people who know the way. And I think now our current understanding of quantum physics is this understanding of complete unity, and so that we have to derive our spirituality from a sense of unity.
I use the pun fundamental with a hyphen to mean the fundamental level of the universe, because at the most basic level, there's a mentality at this most basic level. So, fundamental religions that focus on only their approach to the exclusion of others and are self-righteous and dogmatic, I think is a very bad thing.
The method in science is to produce a conjecture about reality, and then you set out hammer and tongs to disprove it. In that process, you will be able to strip away the accretions and the peripherals and hopefully get at a core that's hard and fast. And as somebody said yesterday here at the conference, 90% of new knowledge is going to the garbage bin in a few years anyway, and that's the way it ought to be. Now, the single exception to that in the field of human endeavor has been religion, because religion says, we have all the truth already, right from day one, and therefore it can't ever change. Therefore, we can't set out to refute it. And because it has never set out to refute the peripheral aspects of its presuppositions, religion has become more and more irrelevant to the evolution of human thought.
Mustard seed. This parable is a brilliant parable to an age in which there was no science. So he says to his disciples that the kingdom of heaven is not in the sky. And look, many will say that it is here, it is there. But in reality, he said, all right, a mustard seed is the tiniest of seeds. The kingdom of heaven. And what does that mean? It means who we really are and where we have our eternalness. where we have our alwaysness, where we have always been and always will be, that self is smaller than a mustard seed, and that the kingdom to which God lives is as small. Jesus knew this 2,000 years ago. And how is he going to teach a bunch of fishermen, tax collectors, and riders on asses about quantum physics? And the key ingredient, the key to the kingdom of heaven, is self. And where do we find self? In this morass of tiny, the observer. So, what did he know that you do not know? And he knew it 2,000 years ago. And so did the mystery schools 2,000 years ago know this. What are we really? We have determined it. What are we ultimately? We have determined it. That we are even smaller than the smallest phase of time from 0 point energy to its recognition. So how small are we? We are 0.0, and we fluctuate off of that 0.
So when we say the kingdom of heaven is within you, as Jesus put it, rather than God was within you, then we're talking about a complete identification of our being with the divine source that's at the origin of it all.
The only reason that there is an addiction to religion is some way out of a mistake. Does that diminish the greatness of God? No, it actually opens the corral and lets God be eternal, absolute. The law that is given to us is the same laws given to those people on Sirius. They're given to us by the people in the Rose universe or the I universe. You know, and your Hubble telescope has finally seen galaxies of immeasurable beauty. That in our heart and in our mind we long to engage. It's exciting to meet beings of greater mind or lesser mind. And where does it end? It doesn't end. It doesn't end.
We do not want to accept responsibility. We do not want to accept our greatness. So it's very easy for any system of thought, religious or otherwise, that comes along, it's very easy to play on that, to play on our insecurities, to assure us all is well, we'll all be taken care of. We lap that up. So don't blame religion. Blame our own insecurities, which has allowed religion to flourish, and which has allowed so many systems of thought that are disempowering to flourish throughout human history. That's why we can't get out of it.
I now present to you Mr. and Mrs. Richard Buck Filipowski.
Experiencing something in the present day that is a trigger to something that is very emotionally charged for us. So now we have become even more disconnected from the reality of what actually is.
The new dream, like a thunderstorm in our brain, and its electrical strikes through our synaptic skies to the earth of our being, creates a chemical cascade in our body that prepares our body for conquest, achievement, a relishing experience emotionally. But we would have no conquest. Indeed, we would have no relishment if we had not first had that hologram and those chemicals that made us, or rather changed us, from being fearful entities into fearless entities after a dream. The frontal lobe is the crowning achievement of the human brain. Frontal lobe. This frontal lobe allows us a distinguishedness to change our minds.
So it begs the question, what is free will? We really think that we have free will when we make choices. But there was an experiment done with people who had damage to the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is the area of the brain that we use to really make free will choices. And these people all had damage or strokes to their frontal lobe, and they put them in a situation where they said, this is a test, and there's no right or wrong answer, but you can choose whatever you want. Now, all the people who had damage to the frontal lobe could not choose. They could not choose one answer or the other. They could not make a choice. When they repeated the experiment and they said, now there's a right or wrong answer, the moment they said there's a right or wrong answer, these people were able to choose. So it has to cause us to begin to question if we ever really choose based on free will, or are we just choosing what we already know? And that free will means that we stop enough to be able to separate all the knowns and speculate possibilities and potentials that exist in the unknown. When we live by those automatic circuits that are already wired known patterns of association, we're really not making any free will choices. We're choosing based on what we know. And as long as we choose based on what we know, we'll always get what we know.
So at the level of the brain, you've got lots of neurons interacting locally. They produce a global intelligence that's associated with the brain as a whole. But then when you look at individual neurons, the interior of the neurons is a different physical implementation of the same principle. And in fact, at every scale, as you go down, like Chinese boxes nested the one in the other, each individual processing element at one scale can be shown to be composed of innumerable smaller processing elements within it. And ultimately, at the lowest level, the analogy is not going to be obvious, but mathematically it's rigorous. At the lowest level, the process whereby proteins fold obeys essentially the same mathematical self-organizing dynamic as how a neural network processes information. So the folding of a protein is mathematically identical to the generation of a thought, if you will, or the solving of a problem. Except that when you get down to that level, the process whereby these so-called neighbor-to-neighbor interactions take place is subtly different in incorporating quantum effects. And that's really where the notion of the quantum brain comes in. Not that the brain as a whole entity is a quantum entity, but rather that quantum effects at the lowest level are not only capable of, but of necessity, are amplified upwards because of this nested Chinese box arrangement of the nervous system.
Consciousness enters this physiology and animates this physiology by essentially bubbling up through each individual cell and through the DNA within each cell. The DNA is a quantum mechanical entity, but it's a macromolecule. It's got one foot in the macroscopic classical world and the other foot deep in the quantum mechanical world. It's the bridge, if you wish, between quantum mechanics and matter. But having one foot in quantum mechanics, which is the world of thought,
It basically transduces those impulses of thought into chemicals and into the chemistry, biochemistry, electrophysiology of thought.
Jeff's approach is that quantum randomness influences neurons at the level of microtubules. And I would say that it's more than that. I would say that quantum effects act in concert, coherently, more globally in the brain, that we may have macroscopic quantum states throughout large regions, if not the whole brain, that are basically identified with or influence consciousness. You go down a level of neural networks, then to neurons, and inside the neurons to the microtubules, which are acting as quantum computers. And then you look at the individual components of the microtubule, which is a protein which changes its shape like that. So on, off, yes, no, 1 or 0, however you want to make a computer analogy. And that is the bit, the fundamental bit inside neurons, inside cells that controls what's going on. Now that in turn is controlled by their little pockets inside the proteins in which electrons are free to roam. They're non-polars, so they're able to roam. And if they're in one position, say an electron here and here, the protein's open. If it's here and here, it's closed. So the movements of these individual electrons, which are governed by what are called van der Waals forces, control the state of the protein, which in turn computes in the microtubule, which in turn controls the neuron, which in turn leads to the brain functioning as a whole. Well, the electron movement of these van der Waals forces are also related to the quantum field and the zero-point energies in the quantum vacuum.
Through the workings of the nervous system and the particular way that it implements quantum effects. Very distinct, specific way, not general, not fuzzy, not imprecise, that it absolutely does open the door for free will being a possibility that does not violate modern scientific tenets, and that's consistent to a certain extent with people's subjective impression that we do have free will.
What separates us from all other species is the ratio of our frontal lobe to the rest of the brain. The frontal lobe is an area of the brain that's responsible for firm intention, for decision making, for regulating behavior, for inspiration. It is the seat of what causes us to take information from our environment and process it and store it in our brain to make decisions or choices that are different than the decisions and choices that we've made in the past.
Free will resides in our frontal cortex, and we can train ourselves to make more intelligent choices and to be conscious of the choices we're making.
Most people use very little bit of their frontal lobe, so most people already have a lobotomy, and most people don't really pay attention. So everybody has ADD. And the result of it is it's easier to use the already wired circuits and the stimulus and chemistry that's involved with using those automatic circuits than to stop those circuits and begin to look at possibilities and potentials. So the point is that when we're using those automatic programs that are already wired, they take place in the rest of the brain. And the frontal lobe gets to go to sleep. So even though we think we have the free will to choose, we don't really have free will. What we're doing is choosing what we already know. The brain is made up of tiny nerve cells called neurons. These neurons have tiny branches that reach out and connect to other neurons to form a neural net. Each place where they connect is integrated into a thought or a memory.
A neural net basically has to do with a group of neurons that are functioning together that have a particular type of function. People have looked at these in terms of what have been called cognitive modules, so that there may be neural nets, a group of nerve cells in either the same structure or across the brain that have certain functions that allow us to process information in a particular way.
Now, the brain builds up all its concepts by the law of associative memory. For example, ideas, thoughts, and feelings are all constructed and interconnected in this neural net, and all have a possible relationship with one another. The concept and the feeling of love, for instance, is stored in this vast neural net. But we build the concept of love from many other different ideas. Some people have love connected to disappointment. When they think about love, they experience the memory of pain, sorrow, anger, and even rage. Rage may be linked to hurt, which may be linked to a specific person, which then is connected back to love.
Every observation can be looked upon as a quantum measurement. This quantum measurement produces memory. We always perceive something after reflection in the mirror of memory. It is this reflection in the mirror of memory that gives us that sense of I-ness, who I am.
The brain does not know the difference between what it sees in its environment and what it remembers, because the same specific neural nets are then firing. We know physiologically that nerve cells that fire together wire together. If you practice something over and over again, those nerve cells have a long-term relationship. If you get angry on a daily basis, if you get frustrated on a daily basis, if you suffer on a daily basis, if you give reasons for the victimization in your life, you're rewiring and reintegrating that neural net on a daily basis, and that neural net now has a long-term relationship with all those other nerve cells called an identity. We also know that nerve cells that don't fire together no longer wire together. They lose their long-term relationship because every time we interrupt the thought process that produces a chemical response in the body, every time we interrupt it, those nerve cells that are connected to each other start breaking the long-term relationship. If we practice our mental rehearsal and our skill in being able to do it will show that certain brain circuits will grow as a result of our effort. It'll get easier to do, in other words. If we accept that idea, then it will allow us to go back the next day and do it with more certainty and with more acceptance. That in itself is no different than praying. You see, there's no religious text that says thought doesn't matter. There's no religious text that doesn't say your prayer and your intention shouldn't be answered by God. But explaining how that happens is what quantum physics and the observer is all about. But still, when we can make thought more real than anything else, our brain is designed to do that. The frontal lobe, with its enormous space, is the altar in which we place a thought. And it gives us the permission to hold the thought for an extended period of time, and it lowers the volume to the external stimuli. We lose track of time and space. That's the moment we're stepping into the quantum field. That's the moment that now we're making thought more real than anything else.
Do you have any favorite rabbit holes?
Well, you can start with the brain, and most people look at the brain operating as a neural network, as a bunch of neurons, 100 billion or however many, talking to each other like nodes or switches in a computer, with synapses being the switches. And that gives rise to consciousness. I don't think that can explain consciousness.
I mean, the brain is meat, you know, so, and it's not the mind.
Meat of the human nervous system has the remarkable capability of reflecting consciousness because it is so designed. It doesn't create consciousness, it reflects it, which gives us a unique advantage over other objects like rocks, which appear so inert because they don't have this ability to reflect what is there at the deeper levels of nature, which is pervasive consciousness.
So I feel like, you know, God exists not so much in the brain as in the body-mind throughout our entire psychosomatic network. But if I were going to choose the most interesting piece, it would have to be the place of highest evolution, once again, the frontal cortex. And you really see this very methodical development of more and more frontal cortex as you progress up the evolutionary scale. And another role of the frontal cortex is, I don't want to say suppress emotions, but kind of slow down the choices around it.
Well, consciousness is the tip of the iceberg in the brain because most of what the brain does is subconscious or proto-conscious or pre-conscious, and only a small part of the brain is involved in actual consciousness at any one time. But the rest of it is important for the latitude of the possibilities of consciousness.
Why is understanding all the stuff about the brain important?
Well, studying the brain isn't important. Studying consciousness through the brain to produce mind is important. When we can understand the functioning brain, or a brain in action, or a brain in motion, we call that mind. And when we can gather information, for example, when a person is anxious and their basal ganglion on a brain scan is hot because their idle is running high, or a person who has problems concentrating that their frontal lobe doesn't work, it gives us enough information to tell us when a person's brain isn't working, they're not working. It's the bottom line. So the brain is the instrument that we use to facilitate consciousness on this level to produce mind to be able to learn and evolve. And we can talk about, you know, we're just a piece of meat. And we can talk about this as being an illusion, but you see, we're not evolved to that point to be able to embrace that understanding, because we still experience cold, we still experience pain, we still experience sensation and hunger, and it's not an illusion because we haven't gotten the training to be able to manipulate reality to that extent. That's something way down the line. But we're just beginning to stand up and accept an unconventional point of view. And that unconventional point of view gives people the opportunity to step outside the boundaries of the way they routinely and automatically fire those circuits. We are physically, chemically, emotional human beings. That's not a bad thing. It only becomes a limitation when we keep accessing those same emotions and those same attitudes on a daily basis and go nowhere in terms of our change or evolution in our life.
All right, now it's time for the kick-ass party.
And you know it's open bar, right?
Yeah, and there ain't nothing like a repressed Catholic girl once you get a few
drinks in her.
How can we say that we have lived fully every day? By simply experiencing the same emotions that we're addicted to every day. What we're actually saying is, I have to reconfirm who I am, and my personality is, I have to do this, I have to go here, I have to be that. A master is quite a different cat. It is one that sees the day is an opportunity in time to create avenues of reality and emotions that are unborn, of realities that are unborn, that the day becomes a fertilization of infinite tomorrows.
Ultimately, the brain becomes hardwired. And then to think outside the box the way those neurons are connected really takes quite an enormous amount of effort, because it challenges your own personal beliefs and perceptions, it challenges your relationships with other people, it challenges even your emotional agreements. And so people have agreements with people and things and places and times and events, and all those agreements have some chemical makeup that supports who they are as an individual, as an identity, as a personality.
A hard question to answer is how all of these little molecular events play into a personality.
If you've seen your own brain scan, it's kind of depressing. You see many different areas of the personality, each with their own electrical activity that seems to have no coordination. It's like a symphony with no conductor. But all of a sudden, if the conductor steps up to the plate, the whole brain would function in unity, in coherence. That's a properly functioning brain.
There's a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is like a little mini factory, and it is a place that assembles certain chemicals that matches certain emotions that we experience. Those particular chemicals are called peptides. They're small chain amino acid sequences. The body's basically a carbon unit that makes about 20 different amino acids all together to formulate its physical structure.
The hypothalamus is actually a structure that's a little bit more right below the thalamus, usually right in this area here. It's a little bit, you can see it as a little bit of a yellow area, and a little later on we'll show how it turns on during these experiences. But the hypothalamus is a main controller of body functions. It regulates all of our basic body functions, heart rate, blood pressure. It helps to regulate most of our hormones, including our sex hormones, stress hormones, and so forth. It helps to regulate our immune function, and it is the key regulator of the autonomic nervous system.
In the hypothalamus, we take small chain proteins called peptides, and we assemble them into certain neuropeptides or neurohormones that match the emotional states that we experience on a daily basis. So there's chemicals for anger, and there's chemicals for sadness, and there's chemicals for victimization. There's chemicals for lust. There's a chemical that matches every emotional state that we experience. And the moment that we experience that emotional state in our body or in our brain, that hypothalamus will immediately assemble the peptide that then releases it through the pituitary into the bloodstream. The moment it makes it into the bloodstream, it finds its way to different centers or different parts of the body. Now, every single cell in the body has these receptors on the outside.
And one cell can have thousands of receptors studding its surface, kind of opening up to the outside world. And when a peptide docks on a cell, it literally, like a key going into a lock, sits on the receptor surface and attaches to it and kind of moves the receptor, and kind of like a doorbell buzzing, sends a signal into the cell.
It's party time!
What happens in adulthood is that most of us who've had our glitches along the way are operating in an emotionally detached place, or we're operating as if today were yesterday.
What is it?
Mixed.
Sign of boredom is a sign to change. And what is it, that we change our mind? We change where our observer sits in our brain that begins to fire new neurons, which the rabbit hole is like a wormhole that loops us into a new neural net in the brain that's already there, by the way, that now we're gonna start living our life from this point of view. And in this point of view, we have never knew what it was to get over guilt by changing our past. That's a new one. And that the promise of our new mind beckons us to new feelings and emotions we've never experienced. I mean, what would it be like? We can only imagine the absolute plethora of possibilities that exist beyond our boredom.
Change in itself means then that we have to abandon our old self. It means that we have to leave behind our identity and begin to speculate who we could be. To change means modifying our behavior enough so that it's permanent.
So if somebody is characteristically responding in the same way over and over again, and that person wants to change the way that they're responding, it requires looking at the problem on several different levels. Sometimes it requires understanding that emotional pattern and connecting the parts of the nervous system that are about emotional survival and cognitive appraisal, and working through the emotional stuckness. That's why I suppose there's so many different types of therapies. There's therapies that are geared more at looking at emotions, more at looking at cognitions, more looking at behavioral ways you can help yourself to get out of a pattern. But I think, again, looking at the human organism as every living system as an integrated whole, that if there are ways of integrating cognition, emotion, behavior, physiology in your approach to change, then that's what's ultimately going to be most helpful. And there are a variety of techniques that can help a person to do that. See, I think what you want here is an answer. What is this thing the person can do? And I don't think there is a thing. I think there's a process that somebody who's in that kind of a pattern, There's a process of things that that person has to go through before they can really do that in a consistent way, repeatedly, so that actually they've relearned a new way of behaving.
There's a human propensity for the mind to consistently move back to the past. That's a natural mechanism that's been developed over eons. When we have a new experience, whatever that experience is, that experience allows circuits and connections in the brain to begin to formulate. As those connections formulate, they release chemicals, and those chemicals make a feeling. So emotions and feelings are the end product of every experience. And feelings and emotions help us to remember experiences better. We know where we were on 9/11 because there was a feeling that was associated with it. Now, what typically happens for most people when they have a novel or a new experience, they repeat that experience over in their mind again. It's a natural propensity. And the reason we do that is because if we can fire those circuits over and over again, by the act of repetition, we can remember them. So we learn from an experience. Learning is making new connections. Remembering is maintaining those connections. And so there's a natural order in which we review something in order to remember it. Now, the problem is with most people is that they become so immersed in the feelings of certain experiences is that feelings become the means of thinking. In other words, feelings determine their thinking. When that happens, we only are living from the past because by definition, feelings are associated to some past event. So if we determine our future based on a feeling, what we're really saying is, I'm trying to create a future situation from a past situation, and invariably we will always continuously recreate the future based on the past, and that future will be more of the past. So what will we see? People who are wired in victimization, people who are wired in suffering, people who are wired in their insecurity, and the feelings become the barometer of their reality, then in their future experience, they could only create reality based on how they're wired. They'll recreate the victimization in their life because it's all that they know. In order to create a new future, we have to leave the feelings of the past behind. We have to abandon the way in which feeling is the means of thinking. And when we're able to do that, we're breaking the association and the neurological networks that are attached to that thinking and feeling mechanism so that we're focusing on an abstraction, an idea, a concept, a dream that we haven't yet experienced because it has no emotion, but it's something that we would like to experience. And that process of being able to abandon the means of feeling for a future potential is the greatest test for the human being.
Our experiences color what we know. So there is no completely objective appraisal of anything, because our appraisal of everything has to do with our previous experiences and our emotions. Everything has an emotional weighting to it.
We've gone from emotions being these spiritual, immaterial things to things, they're not even things, to actual molecules with molecular weights and peptides with sequences and structures.
Science knows now that the hypothalamus makes neuropeptides, and those neuropeptides are strong chemicals.
It was in the early 70s that Saul Snyder and myself first identified opiate receptors in the brain and developed a method for measuring them. And then, people said, hey, what are they doing there? Why would we have receptors? Why would God put receptors in our brain? What would be the point of all this? And then people started to say, well, there must be an endogenous ligand. Ligand's an interesting word. It comes from the same root word as religion, ligare, that which binds. And people started to look, and before long they found a peptide, which is called endorphin or enkephalin. And there's a lot of science around it and a lot of interesting information upon what systems in your body it regulates. So that's where it came from. And then following that, the Valium receptor was big. People found it and looked for endogenous Valium. And now marijuana receptors and endogenous marijuana is hot. There's enough data now to suggest that no psychoactive drug works unless it's binding to a receptor that's normally meant for an internal juice.
You mean I could make LSD if I wanted to?
Yeah, well, you do, but you know, it won't be chemically identical. In fact, Time magazine had a mistake there. They said that morphine was chemically related to endorphins. And that's not true, because morphine is a different kind of chemical structure. Endorphins are a peptide, but they both fit into the same receptor. So LSD and all the psychoactive mushrooms and different analogs, they hit a variety of receptors, actually. And so it's not their chemical structure, it's having the right shape and electrostatic charge to fit into the receptor. Well, here's the story of the peptide in the cell. The peptides find the receptors and dock onto them and stay attached, and they come off, and then they can come back on again, and while they're there, they are changing the cell. A receptor that has a peptide sitting in it sets off a whole cascade of biochemical events, some of which changes the nucleus of the cell. One of the sources of evidence that the molecules of emotion are the molecules of emotion is we have the same identical molecules in the simplest, even one-celled creatures. And so emotions are preserved throughout evolution. I mean, endorphins are in yeast and tetrahymena, simple one-celled organisms. So pleasure is so basic, and we were designed to run on pleasure. I think we're addicted to pleasure, and our brain is set up to record pleasure and seek pleasure, and that's the final endpoint, is to find pleasure and avoid pain, and that's what drives human evolution.
I'm hungry.
The cells are yelling up to the brain saying, we haven't gotten our fix today, and it's going to start sending impressions to the brain, and the brain is going to start to formulate imagery. It's going to sound like voices in our head.
I'm hungry.
To think of a reason why we should be depressed. Think of a reason why we should be confused. Think of a reason for our own suffering. And the body's going to be telling the brain that it's not getting its chemical needs met. And so the brain will then activate and start going to our past situations and flashing pictures to our frontal lobe.
Oh yeah! We've commandeered an entire serving planet! Yeah, keep it coming! Oh yeah!
Addiction is a very powerful word. Is a very powerful word today, and I conclude that it is one of the most important words of all ages, because it fits into the concept of regeneration into enlightenment. And unless we understand addictions, no one here or in your audience will ever understand their own bodies. So you tell me what your modern word means. Addiction.
Well, my definition of an addiction is something really simple. Something that you can't stop. We bring to ourselves situations that will fulfill the biochemical craving of the cells of our body by creating situations that meet our chemical needs.
It always happens to me. Why?
So my definition really means that if you can't control your emotional state, you must be addicted to it.
Oh, this ruins everything.
The people that we really love are people who are willing to share our emotional needs, our feelings, whatever they are. Whether they are sexual, whether they are victimized, poor me, poor you, whether they are power, you need somebody to control you so you feel like you're in control.
when I talk about being addicted to emotions and being addicted to chemistry, most people don't even know that they don't even know that they're addicted to their emotions, because that's just the normal way of being. But that describes humanity.
Don't dip your half-eaten shrimp back into the cocktail sauce.
Everyone is addicted. I don't care who they are. And they're addicted because they've never had anything better to replace what they are addicted to and have a reason to wake up every morning to live for. The man who is addicted to power gets up every moment and he drives things that show his power.
Don't dip your half-eaten.
He has to have a lot of people to feed off of, to suppress, to order around, in order to feel worthy. Because he does not feel worthy. He needs the emotions to feel worthy.
Screw you and your health coach. I am the bride's sister. I'll stick my ass in the cocktail sauce if I damn well please.
I want you to get out there and serve, make sure everybody has a full bag.
My husband, Dr. Agu Pert, who has spent a lot of time thinking about addiction, and his work has shown that so much of addiction is really learning, and it's really ironic that things that seem unpleasant, like anger, to me, I don't like being in an angry state. I don't enjoy it. But through a learning procedure, even the weirdest things can start to be reinforcing and pleasant, and you want to repeat them. So you can become addicted to anger. You can be addicted to a state of starvation that isn't normally pleasant. You can get addicted to anything, and it's really through the principles of learning that we get addicted, where we have these internal juices. Certainly the endorphins are one, and it's been shown that the endorphins reinforce or mediate, pleasure that leads you to repeat a given behavior. But obviously there's other peptides and other substances involved in something so important. So we can learn through addiction to seek out any emotional state.
What about people who are addicted to heroin, to marijuana? Well, they all do different chemistries in the brain. They're endeavoring to touch the pleasure center in the brain. That is not what our brain was meant to do. So people reinvent experiences in their brain by distributing the same chemicals, the same feeling, the experience, and the redemption.
Observations that are carried out in a way that they were previously carried out over and over again in a repetitive sense. So it gets to a point where we don't see the role of our observations anymore because they become habitual. It's kind of like being an addict to something. You lose the power of observation. When you regain the power of observation, you can see that by your choices, you can actually alter, restrain, or change what you see out there.
You won't do anything.
Me show you what women want.
What is reality?
How do we know this? They have taken laboratory animals and they've hooked up electrodes in certain parts of their brain that produce those neuropeptides. And those neuropeptides are such strong chemicals that, given the fact that they train the laboratory animal to press a lever to get that chemical release, that neuropeptide release, it would choose the neuropeptide release more than hunger, more than sex, more than thirst, more than sleep. As a matter of fact, it went to the point of physical exhaustion and collapsed before it would take care of itself physically. And that's really what stress does to our body. We become so addicted to the stress in our lives that we can't quit our job, even though it doesn't serve us. We can't leave our relationship because it doesn't serve us. We can't make choices because the stimulus and the responses produce the chemistry that clouds our choices And we're no different than the dog who lacks its ability to make choices because of its smaller frontal lobe.
So how can anyone really say they're in love with a specific person, for example? They're only in love with the anticipation of the emotions they're addicted to. Because the same person could fall out of favor the next week by not complying.
No. You got the punchline wrong. It's a photographer's joke. Go on about your music?
You can't cure an addict. You give an addict everything they want and then they ask for no more. That is when we have owned an experience. And that is when we are wise. Couple that with indeed new revenues to the mind, and revenues to the mind is knowledge. And from knowledge, it's like building blocks. We build new holograms and we create a new storm. And in that new storm, we create realities in which unknown feelings, indeed unknown emotions shall exist.
Are you okay?
Right, I thought that could be some girl.
When?
Now.
I was with the groom.
Hey, I can read you.
I was with the groom just now. Yeah, he loves Paulette. Where? Polacks, they all look the same in a tux.
Everybody secretly is an adventurer. Everybody loves the adventure. It's just taking that first step. And once they have the moment of insight, that moment of insight carries frequency, it carries a message. The cells of the body are enlivened by possibility. They're enlivened by unknown potentials. They're enlivened by a future history or future opportunity that may be down the rabbit hole a little further. And if they allow themselves to experience the quandary and the mysticism and the possibility that when they emerge from the rabbit hole, they're a different person. And now they go back into their world. And because they've processed that information and left footprints in the mind and in the brain, their perception of the world will never be the same.
How can we say that we have lived fully every day by simply experiencing the same emotions that we're addicted to every day? A master is quite a different cat.
Another drink?
It is one that sees the day as an opportunity in time to create avenues of reality and emotions that are unborn, that the day become infinite tomorrows.
To the groom!
To the groom.
What's up, guys?
What's up, man?
Hello. What do we need?
Some boxes. Put out.
Yeah, baby.
Yes, it's a psychosomatic network, and yes, some of us, you know, particularly adolescent boys, are, you know, under the control of lower centers. The I isn't in control of the molecules of emotion. It's more, I don't want to say at the mercy of it, but these rapid eye movements that help us decide where to focus are mediated in the midbrain, and you can map opiate receptors there and receptors for many of the other peptides. So once again, the relevant search command that's going on is related to finding a certain emotional state.
The animal or the human being who gets involved in that mating ritual then ultimately can connect with another person or another member of their species so that they can actually procreate and have more animals.
Oh gosh. She wouldn't fall for me, no.
Oh, mama! Woo! What the hell are you waiting for? Come on, you little pussies! Jeez, I can't believe you guys! What are you? Ooh, come on, just get the hell out of the way! Hi there, honey! Come on, baby, you know you want it. Oh, don't give me that look.
As far as, you know, when you look at human beings, and when you think about our mating rituals, I mean, without trying to be too overly scientific looking at it, but we have a lot of the same kinds of rituals that animals have. When you go to find a mate, you go to a dance, or you go to a place where there's a lot of music, where there's movement, where there's rhythms, where there's sound, where there's a lot of stimulation, and you may take in substances like alcohol or things like that, which will affect the brain in certain ways. And by doing all of those things, what you're really doing is allowing yourself to come together with another person so that you can ultimately go on to have more people.
What about people who are addicted to sex?
Actually, sex itself is an invention to allow us to see into the future. Think about that for a while.
Hello there, big boy.
Is that a rocket in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me?
Some polka music, okay?
I'm gonna play
These
the
people
polka
want to hear
music.
some
I know
polka
we're gonna
music.
play some-
You
I'm
can't
gonna
have
play
a
it.
Polish wedding without polka music!
No, would you leave it alone? Keep your
How can you have a Polish wedding without any Polish music?
hands off my equipment!
It ain't a Polish wedding without a polka!
our mind literally creates our body.
But it all starts in the cell. And who gives the cells the order? The orders come from the neural net in our brains, which are based on the experiences and information that we've logged in there. And we use a certain box of solutions to our life that causes chemistry to take place. So in order for us to change the chemistry, we would literally have to change the neural net, which means we'd have to change our identity, which means we'd have to change our attitude, or change the way in which we interact with our environment. And every time we keep being the same person and keep experiencing the same attitudes, all we're doing is reinforcing ourselves as our identity.
I once did a little gig in a women's prison they're all heroin addicts, and by teaching them that they have receptors for the heroin, and that the more heroin that they take, their ability to make their own internal endorphins, their own internal heroin, basically starts to decline. And then the receptors start to become subsensitive, or there's actually less of them. So there's these actual changes, and then this new information about how less brain cells are being made, so that people get kind of, in all addictions, they get stuck in old patterns.
The person's mental life becomes dominated by pain, such that everything that they perceive is colored by the pain, and sometimes every way that they react and everything that they do becomes all about their pain.
One of the things about receptors is they change in their sensitivity. If a given receptor for a given drug or internal juice is being bombarded for a long time at a high intensity, it will literally shrink up. There will be less of them, or it will be hooked up in such a way that it is desensitized or downregulated. So the same amount of drug or internal juice will elicit a much smaller response.
We're bombarding the cell with the same attitude and the same chemistry over and over again on a daily basis. When that cell finally decides to divide, when it produces a sister cell or a daughter cell, that next cell will have more receptor sites for those particular emotional neuropeptides and less receptor sites for vitamins, minerals, nutrients, fluid exchange, or even the release of waste products or toxins. Now, all aging is a result of improper protein production. What happens when we age? Our skin loses elasticity. Well, elastin is a protein. What happens to our enzymes? We don't digest as well. What happens to our synovial fluid? Those are proteins. They become brittle and stiff. What happens to our bones? They become thin. So all aging is a result of improper protein production. So then the question arises, does it really matter what we eat? And does nutrition really have an effect if the cell doesn't even have the receptor sites after 20 years of emotional abuse to even receive or to let in the nutrients that are necessary for its health? So if the muscle cell is making healthy muscle protein, and over years and years of producing the same attitude chemically, that cell starts to produce the normal muscle protein, but now in the sequence is the amino acid sequence of sadness. That's not the same protein, because we know scientifically that if we alter the amino acid sequence, we've changed the protein. So we have normal muscle protein with the signal of the attitude mixed in with that particular protein. And that's a cheaper grade of protein. It's a weaker protein. And so if you look at the human body when it ages because the proteins that we've produced once when we were 16 or 17 years old are now a cheaper grade of protein than when we're 50 or 60 years old. And who gives the orders for the signaling and from the brain all the way to the receptor site is our own personal attitude. Now, they'll tell you, if you read any scientific text, that genetics causes diseases. Genetics cause disease. And then recently, science now says, well, no, it's not genetics that causes disease. It's the environment that stimulates the genetics that cause disease. But what I'm saying is it's our reaction to the environment that stimulates the effects of genetics that causes disease in the human body. So if we change our attitude, that means we're going to change the effects neurochemically, which means we're going to change our effects biologically, which means we're going to change the effects of the receptor site, which means we're going to change the expression of DNA, which means we're going to change the expression of protein, which means we're going to change the expression of life, which means we're going to change the health of the physical body. So our attitude literally has an effect on a cellular level.
There was a great experiment done Stanford University, I believe, where people were given the task of eating something decadent. I think it was a piece of chocolate cake, or perhaps they chose what the decadent thing was. And the people who did it with a sense of guilt and shame actually experienced a transient decrease in immune function, whereas those who were able to just enjoy the experience and savor this wonderful whatever that they put in their mouths actually had a surge in immune status.
Capacity is in our bodies to be coherent and thus manifest higher and higher energy density levels and to be big-time creators. It's just up to us. We have the free will to not do it or to do it. And then it just takes time and practice. Just pump and iron.
Is it possible to have mind over matter? Baby, the brain is king. The body is the kingdom. Yes. How long will that take to happen? Long enough for it to be the mainstay of your personality. To our very brain, those great thunderstorms, we have tapped yet let a third of its ability. If we lived entirely the wholeness of our brain, which would require the wholeness of our DNA be activated, we would become the legends of old, the immortals.
I really believe that the body wants to heal itself, and the limits are in our own minds of what we believe is possible. I think so much more is possible than we appreciate.
Everyone's DNA, they use less than a third of the DNA. Did you know that there are immortal genes? Did you know that you have immortal DNAs? Did you know that you have the DNA to grow any part of your body, to change it any way you want to? Did you know you have the DNA of humanity? Did you know that you can turn a predisposition of genetics of blindness into a predisposition of sight? Did you know that you can tap your DNA to not only make you immortal, but reverse your aging? Do your genes have that? Yes, they do. It's what gene fingerprinting is all about in its infantile stages. But it's embarrassing when we really know it. Because the great question is, well, If I have an immortal gene, how come I'm not immortal? Why in the is it still there? You can edit that out if you wish.
Gotcha.
Or you can leave it in according to the maturity of the audience. But I'm certain I have said nothing new under the sun, Horatio. You know why? Because you focus only on your emotional means to an end. So your DNA holds what is replicant in you to an experience. You have never gone outside of yourself to create the experience of yourself.
Here's how a intellectual realization can change your body. A sudden new concept, creating an aha, can classically translate to nerve impulses in the hypothalamus, which then cause various different peptides to be released from the pituitary gland, which then circulate through the bloodstream and have the potential to reach every cell in the body, where, by acting on receptors, they can affect change. And that's a classical view. But I think there's another view that can happen not instead of, but in addition to. Our brain is constantly being surveyed by little white cells, that, for lack of a better word, we can call them cells of the immune system, but we're not sure how many of these are stem cells. And they're constantly passing through, and at the same time we have this sudden realization we may imprint an act and set off a cascade of molecular changes in these surveillance cells, and then the surveillance cell may set up residence in the brain and continue to change the brain. So it's not just that the brain changes the body. I mean, the thought process itself changes the thought process. I mean, what we think affects what we will think later, and what we believe becomes true.
If we know the thoughts of a person, we will best know them by their addiction, their continuous, over 24 hours, in a continuum of what emotions they display in their body. We shall know their thoughts.
I hate you.
We never, ever reincarnate to the I love you so much people. We always reincarnate to the situations of why we hate ourselves.
Hate you.
You idiot! You suck! Look at you! You're ugly! You're wood! Nothing! You get it all! I hate you!
What is the greatest necromancer that haunts people that no one has given them the permission to look at and to become? The hated, the despised, the despicable, the fornicator, the con artist, the liar, the deceiver. And yet, because it is so depressed and suppressed, it is the one faculty that never became. And that is closer to who we are than the fictitious valentines of love that we have collected like old pages that are rotting out of our book of life.
We can't even remember who wrote them. So does hate of self, self-incrimination, bring us nearer to a vassal called truth? Yes, it does. Because it tells us who we really are. Because that's the one aspect of ourself that we have never, ever been able to adorn. And unless we analogically become that, we cannot succeed to the throne of enlightenment.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If thoughts can do that to water, imagine what our thoughts can do to us.
The person who has another urge inside of them that they're clearly interested in something else. All they need is a little bit of knowledge. And if they accept that knowledge as a possibility, and if they embrace that knowledge over and over again, sooner or later, they'll begin to apply that knowledge. Now, for some people, it may take 5 minutes. And for other people to take that first step may take an enormous amount of effort because they have to weigh that first step against everything they know. And everything they know is attached to the way their life is presently, all their agreements, all their relationships. And to take that first step means that they have to evaluate what it's going to look like by taking this step against what they know. And there's that battle between those two elements. But once we give ourselves permission to move outside the box, there's a definite sense of relief, and a definite sense of joy, and a sense of understanding that living in that mundane, repetitive, routine life we can predict the outcome of what that looks like. And so the more we do it, the better we get at it.
There's data now that when people are addicted to, whether it's cocaine, heroin, nicotine, alcohol, all of them seem to share a property of blocking the growth of new brain cells. And yet, it can completely come back when the drug taking has stopped.
In terms of possibilities, it brings us back to that concept where the system could go in one direction or another. And depending upon where the person is and what their level of emotional congruency is, what the experience of the system has been, and what the current state of the system is, will really govern if it goes in direction A or direction B.
In general, the field of psychiatry really doesn't allow for enough freedom of action on people's part, meaning an awful lot of problems, not all of them to be sure, but an awful lot of problems that get labeled as psychological problems really amount to people making rotten choices, and they ought to be instructed to make different ones. For example, let's say somebody is having a difficult time, notorious problem, completing a PhD thesis. So they'll run to a psychologist and will spend maybe months and years in therapy, sort of the Woody Allen problem, because they've got a big, complicated psychological neurosis. And really the problem is that they're lazy. And nobody has just said, you know, you're just making a series of rotten choices with how you're spending your time. And nobody has ever instructed you in certain fundamental virtues like self-discipline. And when you get up in the morning, you have to make an intelligent decision about how you're going to spend your time.
People who make up their mind about anything whether they are given a prognosis of terminal cancer, whether they're given a prognosis of a certain health malady that's going to take a certain amount of time. The person who makes up their mind, and that is a great definition of the frontal lobe, when you make up your mind about something, you're overcoming the body, you're overcoming the enforcement from the environment, and you're overcoming time.
Oh, poopy.
If you don't see the traps, you have to go through the crap until you see the traps. Because if you don't see it, it's your only teaching machine. It's your only way for you to come to understand something new. So the universe brings these things to your door, and there is learning in them for you if you are willing to reflect upon them and think beyond the rigid mindset.
Can I? Wow. Borrow some toothpaste? Thanks.
When I talk about we disappearing, I don't mean that we physically disappear. What I mean is that we move out of the area of the brain that has to do with our personality, that has to do with our association to people, our association to places, our association to things and times and events. We don't exist in the associative centers in our brain that reaffirms our identity and reaffirms our personality.
We now have science to back up what our thoughts do and how they make our bodies weak. A lot of scientists who are actually studying this with behavioral kinesiology and other ways, showing that thoughts make your body weak. And thoughts pretty much create your reality. They create what you're going to think about yourself. If you're fat but you think you're wonderful, you'll be wonderful. But most women we're compared all the time with impossible images from Barbie to models. And so we think that our whole currency is how we look and how other people are going to perceive us. And we're always up against impossible standards.
What is relative to their own emotional addiction are movies and dramas and news and all the media that is so beautiful today, and providing people with experiences without having to be there. And yet, that does not define human greatness.
They're so hypnotized by their environment through the media, through television, through people living and creating ideals that everybody struggles to become, that no one can actually become in terms of physical appearance and definitions of beauty and valor that are all illusions, that most people surrender and live their life in mediocrity. And they may live that life and the soul may never really, their desire may never really rise to the surface, so they may want to be something else. But if it does rise to the surface and they ask themselves if there is something more, or why am I here? What is the purpose of life? Where am I going? What happens when I die? They start to ask those questions. They start to flirt and interact with the perception that they may be having a nervous breakdown. And in reality, what they're doing is that their old concepts of how they viewed their life in the world start to fall apart.
That's why very few people make this journey, because it's deeply unsettling. All of the molds that we have lived by have to be broken, and we have to liberate ourselves in this way. And sometimes there's an awkward period between the comfort that we knew before and the real state of comfort when we are the Lord of our being, which follows that interval of chaos. Most people, when they get into the chaos, give up hope and go back to the old false securities. They get to live a reasonable life and they get to die in some sort of peace, but they haven't advanced spiritually at all in that experiment that we call the life.
We're in completely new territory in our brain. And because we're in completely new territory, we're rewiring the brain, literally reconnecting to a new concept. Then ultimately, it changes us from the inside out. If I change my mind, will I change my choices? If I change my choices, will my life change? Why can't I change? What am I addicted to? What will I lose that I'm chemically attached to? And what person, place, thing, time, or event that I'm chemically attached to that I don't want to lose because I may have to experience the chemical withdrawal from that? Hence the human drama.
This life is but a page in an enormous book in which we will always be who we are, but always with the inherent needling of ambitious pursuit, a pursuit that takes us from the boring tedium of self-reflection, of self-hate, and to self-creation of new dreams. And we are ambitious gods.
There's a big paradigm shift involved in the teachings of Jesus from the teachings of the Old Testament. For instance, in the Sermon on the Mount, he quoted Moses saying, "An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, forgive your enemies and do good to those who hate you." In the teachings of Jesus, it seems that thinking something is the same as doing it. So if I think of murdering my neighbor, but don't actually do it, obviously it's different from for the neighbor. But for me, it's not different in terms of human evolution. And this is something that's borne out by the quantum understanding of the world, which we're familiar with today, that it's the thought that governs all things. And in the evolution or the development of myself that I am constructing, so to speak, internally, the thought is what's paramount. So I think in that respect, many of the teachings and parables of Jesus were touching on something that we know now to be eminently profound about the nature of the reality we live in and how the processes of evolution that we want to use for spiritual development actually function.
Part of what the new paradigm is the awareness that the spiritual is real. I mean, in mainstream medicine is the only system of medicine in the entire world that does not invoke higher power and mystery. It's the only one.
Well, I think the reason that science hasn't really explored these questions is twofold. One is that there has been a significant conflict, if you will, between spirituality or religion and science over the last century, really, where people have really come to look at religion and spirituality as kind of this falsehood and as delusional and in a very negative way from the scientific perspective, and having nothing to do with what science can show. But I think what's happened is that not only have people realized that science does have something to say about spirituality and that we can utilize science to help us understand what the spiritual sides are of human beings. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that as our science gets better, we're able to ask more interesting and more complex questions. So 15, 20 years ago, we couldn't ask a question about what goes on in the brain of somebody when they meditate. But now we have the techniques and the ability to explore that kind of issue. So on one hand, science is developing to the point where we are having the ability to ask these kinds of very complex questions about these very unusual experiences that people have. But there's also a realization that there may be more to these experiences than what we have typically thought of, and that science and spirituality may actually have something to say about each other.
A very great spiritual teacher, Jesus said a long time ago, the kingdom of God is everywhere. People don't see it. It is everywhere. This non-ordinary state of consciousness exists within us, and that is what we fundamentally are.
Descartes invented dualism to avoid the problem between the church and science. And ever since, science and spirituality have been on separate paths. And in fact, consciousness and science were on separate paths for much of this century due to the behaviorists. It's only been the last 20 years that consciousness has come back into science. Can spirituality come back into science? I think it can. I think only recently have we got a framework to understand spirituality. For example, this level of the fundamental space-time geometry, which includes or can include Platonic values of good, aesthetics, beauty, pure truth, as well as feeling, emotion, plus the fact that it interconnects all of our conscious entities or proto-conscious entities with other beings and with the universe itself. This interconnectedness, this timelessness, I think is the beginning of a scientific understanding of spirituality.
So what the scientists and what the mystics are talking about are not just parallel realities. They are really one and the same investigation. It's just that scientists have been investigating the material realm, and the spiritual traditions have investigated not only the material, but also the vital, the mental, and even the supramental, the domain of love, justice, these archetypes, which Plato investigated long time ago, even in the West. So that's the difference. Now we have extended our science to not only contain what the scientists have traditionally investigated, the material, but also the mental, the vital, and supramental, and consciousness itself.
At a fundamental level that is even difficult to observe, there's one God self that is all of us. We grow from that. The whole universe grew from it, and each of the separate personalities that appeared have grown from it, with the illusion that each one is a separate individual, but actually we're all from the same tree.
Entanglement is a new idea because it's arising out of science, but the concept of a connected universe is as ancient as we know. I mean, like the fundamental principles in Eastern philosophy is that everything is entangled, but they didn't use those words. But that's basically what the models are from Eastern philosophy. So, you know, we have that as a historical basis for these kinds of ideas. It's called words like cosmic consciousness or collective consciousness. And the new part is that science, through very different means, has encountered this aspect of the world and is now beginning fairly rapidly, actually, to learn the nature of it.
Can you understand what we're talking about here? In terms of religion, you cannot. You know, people often say to me exactly what you've said. You know, can you tell me, you know, when I go home, how my mother or my grandmother, you know, can link this to what she believes in? You can't do it. It's an entirely different worldview. And I think Jesus put it very well when he said, you cannot put new wine into old wineskins, because if you do, you know, the skins will break and it will all be lost.
We are at the end of the paradigm. We're at the finite stage of the sensual paradigm. There's no more paradigm to have in the senses. We can modify the paradigm within the box of what's already been created sensually, but the borders are at its extension.
It's a very weird time right now because East has met West. There's a lot of flowering of ideas, and many of us who were asked to grow up in one paradigm have to switch to a new one, and that is very tricky. For myself personally, I can experience both paradigms. Sometimes I experience a beautiful blend of both, and sometimes I just get up to the new one, fall back to the old, I think that maybe we're the only generation that's going to have to suffer through this, because this movie's going to spell it out for people, right?
You can't just say, well, it only took 20 nanoseconds for this healing to take place, because we don't know in that person's subjective world what the process was that got them up to that point of acceptance, or what got them to the point where they could surrender themselves to a greater order. And so what appears to be a nanosecond could be a person's journey to acceptance. When the soul emerges, when a person begins to wake up, they begin to weigh what they know and what's working for them against what is that inner urge and that inner drive. And for some people, it's a clean cut. They make the break, they understand what it is, and they begin to gain knowledge and apply that knowledge. Other people have to have their system fall apart. They have to go through the disruption of that ordered and finalized, complete state of the personality that keeps everything intact and everything in order based on how the person's wired. So the tragedy, in one sense, is really just the death of an old self. And it allows, then, a birth. And the birthing process at times can be difficult because it's painful. And what's painful about it more than anything else is that we no longer are producing the same thoughts that make the same chemicals. We're breaking the addiction to all those agreements chemically. That is an uncomfortable state for the human being because they can't connect to any person, place, thing, or event out in their world. And because that discomfort gives them the sense of no relation to anything. That is borderline nervous breakdown. It's borderline insanity because you look for some evidence in your life that you're doing the right thing, and everywhere you look for evidence in your life is with the people you've had all those agreements with. So you can't even turn and talk to those people because they're going to ask you to go back to the same person so that they can keep that agreement intact. If the person has the knowledge to be able to understand that, and they can ride their way all the way through it, they'll begin to understand that a new self is emerging. And those old patterns will literally crumble. They'll literally disconnect in the brain. And it'll give them an opportunity to give birth to a new self. That new self will have a whole new set of people in their life equal to who they become.
When a person says, do I create my reality? The answer is, but you already are creating it. Who you are is made up of the reality that you are currently. To change that would be to change one of those concepts of people because you became expanded, that you brought into your neurological makeup an idea. That new idea suddenly augments present reality. And because the idea is now in your mind, it's in your frontal lobe, its reality forms. And suddenly you go, wow, I just had this great experience, I had this idea, and then this wonderful thing happened to me. I mean, what was that? The answer is you created reality. Well, what did I create it from? Sourced from an idea. Well, why don't I do that all the time? But you have. The idea of who you are with, where you live, what you look like, what you wear, who you talk to today, what you're going to do tomorrow, you have all created this as fundamentally your reality. So everybody in your life is an aspect of yourself, and what you did is you simply added to it. You added a new reality to that mix. So we're so busy being it. It's like the fish in the ocean. Somebody gives the idea to the fish that it's a novel idea to ask for a drink of water. So the fish asks for a drink of water and everybody starts laughing because the fish is in the water. So it's sort of like saying, how do I create my reality? Well, you are the reality. You're already creating it. We only see what we are when we step out of it and we look back at who we've been.
there is enormous potential to change the kind of behaviors and characteristic patterns that we've fallen into. In fact, if you've listened and have remembered anything that I've said, your physiology is different than it was before that. That is something that Eric Kandel, the recent winner of the Nobel Prize in Medicine and Science, said very eloquently at a talk, that basically memory has been encoded, your genetic structure has changed, and while we previously would talk about the nervous system as this very rigid thing that didn't have much capacity for change, we now know that on many levels that isn't true. And actually there's a tremendous amount of plasticity, which basically means ability to change within the nervous system.
And if you look at the structure of the human brain in detail, you see that it's specifically designed, it's carefully engineered to experience the unified field, to experience the unity of life.
When people have a mystical experience, what usually happens, how they describe it, is that they begin to lose the usual sense of material reality around them. In fact, if they go far enough and they achieve a sense of absolute unitary experience, then all of the material world as we typically know it basically goes away. What we're talking about there is an experience of just pure being, pure awareness, pure consciousness. So it's not necessarily tied to anything material. And because those experiences have been described in extremely real terms, meaning that when people have that experience, they perceive it to represent a more fundamental level of reality than our everyday material reality that we normally live in, it creates a very big philosophical problem. Because when we actually try to evaluate what is real and how we know what is real, my colleagues and I have ultimately come to the conclusion that the only way to really make a determination is based on how real it feels, what the sense of it feels. Everything ultimately is reduced to that experience. How real of an experience does it feel? How much does it feel like absolute reality? Well, in that case, when we look at the mystical experiences, they really are associated with an experience of much more fundamental reality than what our everyday reality is like. In fact, even when they're no longer having that mystical experience, they still perceive that reality to be the more real, to represent the more truer form, the more fundamental form of reality. And the material world that we live in is kind of a more secondary reality for them.
The reason why people are attracted to psychic experiences or mystical experiences is because they feel it has enormous meaning, like more meaning than usual. And the reason for that is typically a feeling of connectedness, a merging of your ego with something else. And why that should create this internal sense that it's important is not entirely clear to me. But oftentimes a single psychic experience can be life-transforming.
Change is always interesting because it's like walking across a stream. You have a good idea what you want. You say there's life on the other side. I can predict everything on this side of the river. I can predict actions of the people. I can predict the comings and goings of different events. I know how everything's going to be. It's a routine enough experience that I'm bored and I want more. And so we venture across the river, and as we start entering into the river, we realize that it's cold and the water has a strong current and it's dangerous. And the moment that we stop to analyze how we're feeling, we lose sight of the other side. And the moment that happens, we rush back to what's comfortable and what's familiar and what's common. And then we can say, when we do that, well, see, that change just didn't feel right. Well, that feeling we were relying on was a feeling based on reaffirming our old personality. The person who has the ability to hold a thought and to hold an ideal and to hold a vision in spite of the feedback from their body is executing the movement to a greater reality.
Whenever our boundaries are contracted, we become identified with a small cocoon, we become unhappy. So the whole idea then is to shift, to extend our boundaries. And then whenever we have expanded the boundaries, we are in that extended, bigger self, non-ordinary state of consciousness, which is the source of our happiness.
When you start to realize what your true nature is, there is no question, there is no answer anymore. And there is just sudden realization. Now you come back from the rabbit hole and you start to perform in this world of illusion and wonder and magic with that understanding that you're never going to die. and you were never born.
Choice by consciousness out of these possible events, the actual event of experience comes in. And so, for the first time, science encounters free will. Consciousness is free because there is no mathematical description of the subject. Only objects can be described mathematically, and only to the extent that there are possibilities. The question still remains paramount: who is the chooser?
Are all realities existing simultaneously? Is there a possibility that all potentials exist side by side?
Welcome to Flatland, a world of only 2 dimensions. Only forwards and backwards, left and right. In this world, there is no up and no down.
I said to Ray, "Where's Dottie?" He said, "Well, she's out in line." I said,
What the bleep is that thing? Huh?
In this world, the 2-dimensional beings that live here have no concept of 3-dimensional objects. These 2-dimensional flatlanders have no understanding of cubes, spheres, tetrahedrons, or yours truly. From their 2D perspective, my 3D finger looks something like this.
What the letter does that?
Hello, little circle. Fear of the unknown. Or should I say, not yet known. It's a puzzle. If we see only what we know, how does anyone ever see anything new? The unknown. How do we ever get out of our box? Hello, little circle. Don't be afraid.
Who said that? Where are you?
This is always the tricky part to explain. I'm in another dimension, another space. I am above you.
No, never use that word.
What word?
The A word.
Above?
It's forbidden.
Well, what do you think it means?
I don't know, and I don't want to know. You can be severely punished if you use that word. Are you a ghost?
I hope not. I just have a different perspective than you do. I can see things in a way you can't yet.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
Well, okay, you have a safe hidden in your pantry. And inside it, you have 12 coins, a will, and a passport.
How did you know that? What are you? Are you a god?
Well, no more than you. You see, since I am above you, in the 3rd dimension, I can see inside things in your world.
3rd dimension? You are a crazy ghost. There's only 2. Look.
So, if I were to touch the inside of your stomach, How would I do that?
Well, you'd have to cut through my skin. Otherwise, it's impossible. Stop! Stop! No.
Ready for more?
More what?
Dimensions.
Oh.
Directions.
No. Yes, but there aren't any. More? What will happen to me? What will I become?
You'd have to become it to know.
Okay.
Excellent.
I never knew.
When was the last time you ever looked at you through the eyes of the mirrors that you call your beloved, your friends? When was the last time you ever saw you through the mirror and understood you?
I am much more than I think I am. I can be much more even than that. I'm not alone.
Knowledge allows the brain to begin to become wired, and we will begin to see what has always existed, but because we live in those routine automatic programs, we're unable to see because we're processing mind from the familiar. To learn knowledge means we're learning new things. And to learn new things means we're gathering information and creating the circuitry now to begin to develop the sensitivity, to begin to see things for the first time.
We are entangled. If you want to call it quantum entanglement, fine, but we are entangled. And there is no real separation between us, so that what we do to another, we do to an aspect of ourselves.
Why do we not see the entanglement? Because evolution has pushed us to not see it. And we get quite good at not seeing it. You know, the sensory input is constructing this image of the world in which the things are separate. But we know through experiments, we know through experience, that they're separate, but at some level, they're not so separate after all.
We're finding non-locality everywhere, in our bodies, in space, from stars, in regions of the zero-point field, everything is connected. And so we have this involvement in everything. We are our world. There's no out there. There's no place where we end and everything else begins. We're all connected.
You take this notion of an entangled universe and you apply it to human experience, because human experience is part of the universe as well. And then you say, well, let's assume that experience is entangled, then how would it manifest? And we can start going through ways in which it could manifest. If there's a connection with another mind, we call it telepathy. If there's a connection to some other object somewhere else, we'd call it clairvoyance. If there's a connection that happens to transcend time, we'd call it precognition. there's a connection in which my intention is expressed out in the world some way. We might call it psychokinesis or distant healing or something of that sort. So you can go through a list of perhaps 12 kinds of psychic experience that have gotten labels over the years, like telepathy. But this is really just the tip of the iceberg.
I think entanglement and collapse in one system inducing collapse in another is exactly what happens in parapsychological phenomena. And it's also true that time can go backwards, so that they don't even have to be simultaneously. One can occur before or after the other. And near-death experiences, particularly when patients report leaving their body and floating above them, their bodies, watching themselves being worked on, and then return to their body, could be due to the fact that consciousness is ultimately a process in fundamental space-time geometry. And when the coherence driving the system stops due to the metabolic insult to the brain, the information is still in fundamental space-time geometry, which is everywhere. So it would tend to start to dissipate. However, due to quantum entanglement, would tend to stay somewhat localized and float above, maybe go out in the waiting room and visit with relatives, which has been reported in near-death experiences. But then when the body is resuscitated, revived, and the metabolic drive in the brain resumes, the information returns to its host, the brain.
We are all connected. I mean, I think the most fundamental thing is we're all connected by an energy field. We swim in a sea of light, basically, which is the zero-point field. And I say, first of all, you have to get away from the whole idea of separateness, because separateness is the biggest problem of the world now.
Whatever way we observe the world around us is what comes back to us.
One then begins to see others as part of themselves. One begins to see that it's best just to love others and not judge them. That what you do to build another actually builds yourself. You begin to see that you're connected, you're part of a large family.
Love of one's neighbor, I think, is based upon the recognition of neighbor as oneself. Ultimately, of course, when consciousness is developed and education is working, one will perceive other as oneself because we're all one unity. There is only one consciousness, there's only one unified field.
Jesus' teaching, love your neighbor as yourself, was actually a teaching about the higher frequencies of the nature of reality. In other words, he didn't say, love your neighbor because it's a good thing to do. Be nice to your neighbor and God will reward you. He was, I suppose we could say, practicing enlightened self-interest at its best, because what he knew that with the intent, which we call the observer in the quantum world, the intent of the observer towards another, what you express towards another, is what you create for yourself. So if you express love or hate or harm to another, you're creating it. And the prime beneficiary in all creation is yourself. So when he said, love your neighbor and do good to those who hate you and so forth, he was actually paying tribute to the role of the observer in everything that we do.
Well, one of the consequences of this entanglement issue is that every thought is received by every other person who can think. Our thoughts have action, have intentions, have consequences that spread out into the world. From a personal basis, my thought is a drop in the ocean. So probably what I think doesn't matter a whole lot. But if there are a billion of me, and we happen to be thinking along the same lines, it probably will be picked up and influence other thinking creatures. So in a sense, if this line of thinking plays out, then one of the consequences may be that we need to be more responsible for our thoughts.
We are all creating the future. We are all creating what is outside of us. None of us are innocent in that regard. If there's something out there we don't like, we can't really turn our backs on it because we're co-creators somehow or other. And we have to do the right things to try to get the future that is best for all of us.
All our separate consciousness, wherever there's consciousness, is merely consciousness by virtue of the fact that my consciousness, your consciousness, are ultimately that. Everything in the universe is really nothing but that. Planets, trees, people, animals, we're all just waves of vibration of this underlying unified superstring field. We are really united at our core. And ultimately the understanding that's emerging will be that there is only one consciousness in this room. And it is you, and it is me, and that is each and every one of us. We individualize our consciousness through the filter of our nervous system, but the consciousness itself, our very inner subjectivity, the self in the big sense, that is universal. And knowing that, knowing it through experience, is called enlightenment, and has been called enlightenment through the ages.
In the end, these were but tools to bring imagination into a quantum fury, a dream that sets its sights above the mundane and the mediocrity of life, that everyone can set their sights therein. Then we are no longer hated and despised, but we have done the one most excellent virtue. We have saved ourselves through simply applying our most excellent eternal ability, and that is that we are God, and that we call out of inertness, the wind-sprayed particles of chaos, and we freeze them for a momentary reality in which all predecessors and all successors agree upon, and now we have tangibility of mass. But we have brought it out of nothing. And how could we ever be nothing? We could never be nothing. It is only out of nothing that we have our being, but our being we do have, and we are ambitious gods.
To ask the great questions, to begin to formulate possibilities, means that we have to stop the normal way in which we think. When we ask the great questions, we're stopping a moving locomotive. We're stopping that process. And now we're beginning to speculate possibilities, potentials. The whole purpose in life is to change an outcome, to change something about ourselves, to modify our behavior, modify our actions, to have a new experience. To have a new experience means then we're no longer in the typical routine way in which we do things. To ask the great questions is to say, I've pretty much experienced everything that I know. Now I'm interested in knowing something else.
At the end of the day, the summation of all of this is, does it enrich our life? Does it give us a better way to change our mind?
Hey, you're back.
I'm back.
So you never answered my question.
What question?
How far down the rabbit hole do you want to go?
I think we love rabbit holes so much because we realize that there is a greater reality out there and that the reality is much more akin to our dreams.
Rabbit holes are the best thing since Pop Top can.
To go down the rabbit hole and to get away from the mundane is thrilling.
The rabbit hole and how deep and how far we want to go is really how much do you want to discover about your true nature?
far down the rabbit hole do you want to go?
All the way.
No, it actually, in all honesty, it was one of the most difficult jobs I have ever done in my entire career.
Back for a tremendous panel. Hey, baby.
Good job, Mom.
Hey, baby.
Good job.
But I do want to introduce Betsy Chassie, who is co-director, co-producer, co-writer, co-everything for What the Bleep. She's just going to take off now and lead this panel.
Coolest thing ever. Jay-Z, thank you so much for talking because it was fabulous.
You know that adversity is the greatest teacher in advancing our skill of mind and environment.
Joey, you're awesome.
The new experience of that will have a whole new host of chemicals.
You guys are going to see Nihal tomorrow.
And I have the religious portfolio here this weekend, which is why I'm doing the Sunday morning service tomorrow.
Nihal. I'd like to add one more person to our panel. You guys know him as Reggie. We call him Robert Bailey Jr. Just really happy to be here. It's amazing to see all these people supporting the film, and it's a really thought-provoking film. It's just great to see everybody liking it, loving it, really. It's just great to see everybody appreciate it.
My name is Dean Radin. I'm senior scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences in Petaluma, California.
Okay.
We pretend it doesn't exist.
Okay, no problem.
Okay.
Okay, my name is Lynn McTaggart. Is that it? That's great. Did we ever answer? We answered the question you wanted me to answer.
Yeah,
Did you about?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
She wouldn't say get a freaking clue, but.
For those of you who have not met me, my name is Mark Vicente. I'm one of the filmmakers, one of the Unholy Trinity. We have a few panelists that are missing right now, Candace Pert and Fred Allen Wolf. If you find them in the bar, please bring them in. So I thought I'd start with David.
One of the aphorisms that Bohr is famous for is I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but it's something like, somebody claiming to understand quantum mechanics is the first sure sign that they don't.
Is this one working? So they need as much rigor in their just because there's more of them doesn't make them right. Okay.
I always caution all my lab researchers before they take the pictures to prepare their hearts in 3 ways.
真それは真善美という言葉であります。
And so the 3 concepts that I really like for my staff to have before they begin their work are the concepts of truth, of the concepts of virtue, and the concept of beauty.
This elusive, mysterious thing, observer consciousness, is having an effect on something out there. What do you think?
I want to teach you a little Japanese so you can get this. Wakarimasu. Wakarimasu ka? Wakarimasu. Do you understand? Do you not understand? This is a problem, and I'm going to get to what the answer to this in just a moment, but I just want to point out that having Dr. Emoto here is a rare treat for me because it gets me into my Japanese consciousness again.
So, Candace, what do you think?
Well, as I said in my opening comments, I'm not a quantum physicist. I'm just a lowly psychoneuropharmacologist. So I'm starting to feel comfortable as the discussion has.
I'm Dr. Daniel Monti. I'm a physician with specialty training in psychiatry and human behavior. I'm on the full-time faculty at the Jefferson Medical College.
I've heard some people say that, consciousness is this wonderful property in the universe that has a predilection for the human brain. If that's the case, then consciousness is about 3 pounds and looks a little bit like a gray cauliflower. It's showtime.
Experience going through a microscopic wormhole. At the moment you can travel instantaneously anywhere, you can also go back in time.
So the mathematics of it says that the placebo effect is going to be proportional to the treatment effect, and a few other things. You probably have more to say about it.
No.
Sorry about that.
Multiple personality disorder have to say about the seat of consciousness. And the second one is, what made you want to become a physicist at the age of 50?
Okay, well, I guess multiple personality disorder.
So thank you, all you gods and goddesses, for coming, and thank the panel, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
And what was the title of this film again?
What the f*** do I know?